Everybody, so this week we're going to show several different projects that you should be able to have some luck with selling. I'm going to focus on low budget items. I think as a beginner woodworker, this is what you should focus on over making large pieces. While making quite a bit of money on one large piece really is rewarding, and at some point you may want to move into that, especially if you're selling local at like festivals and stuff. People is much more likely to spend 25, 30, 40 bucks on, you know, your projects versus $200-300 or upwards on a larger piece of furniture. Not only that, but you don't have to have as much money to get started, and you can sell these small things to afford to buy the tools that you need or the lumber you need to build the bigger project. So this first one's just going to be some coasters. What you see is I marked them out for 3.5-inch coasters, cut them, cross cuts, and the rip cuts on the table saw. And then I'm just using a bandsaw to resaw my material here. This allows me to get twice the amount of coasters out of this same piece of walnut. My goal for this video is for you to be able to take these ideals and hopefully make yourself some money in your local area. So here I'm just using a very fine router bit. I believe this one comes from makeasign.com, and I'm just carving out an initial into this coaster. And I apologize, during this video you're going to see a couple different coasters. It's all the same style, but they'll have different letters on them. I was making a batch while I was making them, so I apologize that I wasn't able to keep them all straight and use the same one throughout the entirety of the video. Here I'm just using a really sharp chisel, cleaning up the edges of the carved initial. I'm just using standard black artist paint to fill in that initial here. You could also absolutely use like colored epoxy if you wanted to do that. It would probably take your item up a little bit in value. And everyone's favorite part here, I'm sanding it. While I've talked about this in every one of my videos, it's definitely not your favorite part to sand. However, it is one of the most important points to do on every project. So I'll finish those a little bit later with this. I just used a 45-degree chamfer bit and rounded over the edge. This one is a sign. I'm making this one for my wife, actually. She just had her second child, and I'm just using these stencils to lay it out the way I want it. And then I'm going to use that same router bit, and I'm going to carve it. This is the one that I chose to do the video. You can make these signs ever how you want. You can make whatever design you want. You can use stencils. You can freehand it. The sky's the limit with signs, and people love spending money on these interior decoration. You can easily sell a sign like this for 35-40 bucks, especially the fact that this one's used walnut, and I'm going to use a really pretty finish on it. You also don't even have to finish it all. I mean, the sky's kind of the limit with these signs, and they are great sellers. Like I said, I'm just carving out the outline, and there's a picture of that. I'm not going to show you the footage of me carving all that. You've seen it on the later. The process is exactly the same. I got that one a little bit off. I just eyeballed it versus measuring out each individual letter. Yeah, it's definitely a better ideal to measure them out and get them perfect, but I was in the mood to be a little squirrely on it, so it was off just a little bit, but it turned out okay. So I didn't use paint on this one just because I didn't have a fine enough paintbrush, so I wound up using a Sharpie to highlight the carving. It actually turned out really nice, so it's an option if you don't carve out the center of the letters, where I just done the outline on this one. Alright, again, like I said, the most important part. I won't bore you with endless amounts of sanding. I hope you're enjoying this video so far. I hope you get something out of it, and I hope it makes you some money. If you get anything out of it, or you just like me doing content like this, or just want to support me, then I would greatly appreciate if you would subscribe to my channel. It helps me out quite a bit and allows me to continue to do this. So here I'm just using a keyhole to allow her to hang this photo. I just used a 3/8 bit, drilled a hole, and then this is just a straight cut router bit, and I'm just making that keyhole with that. You notice I'm using a straight edge to make sure that line stays straight. And I used that center punch to start my drill bit, so I knew it was going to not walk on me. This is not the only way to hold it, to put your signs on the wall, but it's definitely a really good option. Super easy to do, and it's plenty strong enough for something like this. Alright, so I finished all of these at the same time just because it's easier. This finish I used, you have to mix 2 parts into one, and once you mix it up, you can't reuse it. So just in the effort not to waste it, I went ahead and finished all these at one time. You may have guessed it already, this is Rubio Monocoat. It's a hard wax finish, so it's a hardwood floor finish, but it does really good on walnut, which I'm using here. It soaks into the wood, so even if you got a dusty shop, it's not going to have those dust particles under it like a spray lacquer would. It also gives really good protection if you don't sand it past, I believe it's 120. I did sand these to 220, mostly because I wasn't worried about the sign having a super great protection. And those coasters, I'm actually going to put a clear coat on it, a N3 Nano from Blacktail Studios, so you don't have to worry about the water rings from setting drinks on it. And if you do that, you don't have to worry about what level you sand it to. So I wanted to leave this sign matte, so I just used 1 coat of the Rubio on it. You could absolutely scuff that up, put a second coat on it. You can see how I did that in the bookshelf build, and it will greatly enhance the sheen of that finish. So here's the bonus that I was telling you about. If you don't want to make it a sign, you can add one of these little clips and make it a little picture frame. So you could make the same thing, either a sign or a picture frame. So I popped up that in editing because, again, I was being a little bit ambitious with this here build, and I didn't pre-drill it. I thought it would work out fine. Spoiler, it did not. Alright, project number 3. This is going to be a cutting board. The market's a little bit saturated with cutting boards, so you're going to have to fill out your area on this particular one. But they're extremely popular, so I thought I would include it in the build. This one is purple heart ends with walnut centers. And what I was doing in this previous shot was just marking I's and O's on each project or each piece. That way I knew to put either in or out on the fence of my jointer. Here's another way of doing it. I just wanted to include this. If you don't have a jointer, you can just put a flat edge, or excuse me, straight edge against the project, put it against your table saw fence, and just move them together. If you don't move them together, though, it's still going to reference the other side of that piece of wood and not the straight edge, so you're not actually going to get a square side. Alright, here's the next item. It's a cutting board. Alright, so we're doing the glue up. It's not necessary to use dowels or dominoes or anything like that. It's not going to give them any strength. It just would help you line them up, and for the price that you're going to sell these for, it just doesn't really make sense. If you put them on little strips like I did or cause, they're going to stay plenty level enough that you could fix it with either a hand planer or a planer. So I'm just doing the clamps, and you'll see as soon as I get done doing these clamps, actually back up, there's a pretty cool tip here. I'm using the straight edge of the clamps to get one side straight, so I'm just pushing them all back against that clamp and clamping them. Now here's where I'm using that caul. It just puts a straight edge across the cutting board, and that keeps it good and flat. It'll require very little planing before I sand it here. Alright, now for it come out of the clamps, everything's good and dry. For everybody's favorite part, we're going to do some sanding. I sanded this all the way up to 220 as well. And it's also important to water pop these in between. And all that is you're spraying some water on it in between each grit. That way any of the fibers stand up, you get those knocked down, and your customer doesn't feel them when they wash the board for the first time. So I'm just using blue tape here as I cut them to final size. What that does is it prevents any tear out or blowout on the edges of those boards when you run them through your blade. Alright, now we're going to move on to the fourth project. This one's going to be a wooden Christmas tree. This is one of the best sellers here. People love spending money on interior decoration, as I'd mentioned earlier, and they love it even more for decorations for like holidays and that type of stuff. So, yeah, make some decoration. It'll definitely help you make some money. So I had originally tried to shoot this portion of the video where I was talking to the camera, but I kept having people come into the shop and talk, and it didn't work out. So I apologize that I'm standing here talking. I will try to do better in the future on that. All I was telling you is I was using a speed square to get that 45-degree angle off of my original mark, so when I cut this angle on the board, that'd be the correct length. I've done this one a little bit wide. This is 22 inches. You can make these trees whatever size you want. There's no set size that they have to be. If you want to follow along with me, though, it was 22 inches. I'm making 2 out of this board, so I'm just going to rip it in half on the table saw. You also see I cut 2 45-degree angles on both sides of the board facing the same direction. The reason I done that is I just like the way it looks, quite simply. You could absolutely just leave it square if you like that, so it just doesn't really matter. Here, I should have never done that. Use a push stick. It's not worth losing your fingers for. It takes 5 seconds to grab a push stick. Alright, so again, I apologize on the Christmas tree build. My camera malfunctioned and I didn't get any footage on the miter saw of me cutting these out. If you want exact measurements of these, I believe these ones was 10 inches each. That first board that's against the base is 30 degrees. The rest of them are cut on 45s. Again, it's a tree. It doesn't have to exactly be perfect. It's really just what you want, but if you want to follow along with me, that's what mine are. Now this top one is the only one that's not a 45 degree other than the first 2 on the base of the tree. And honestly, I can't remember what this angle was. I believe it was something like 17, 18 degrees. But you can just sneak up on the cut if you don't have a bevel gauge. I used a bevel gauge to get it. I hadn't made the tree this size, so I had to figure that one out on this one as well. So use a bevel gauge or sneak up on it, whichever one you want to do. Here's a trick. I use blue tape instead of clamps because it would have took a lot of clamps. Blue tape has got like a little bit of a spongy, stretchy type material, so it works pretty well for clamps, and it'll hold something tight enough for the glue up. And it was, I hadn't noticed it quite yet, but you can see on the top right of that tree, that angle's messed up. I screwed this tree up. So I'll show you how I fix that in just a minute. So, okay, so I was shaking it here to see if I needed to put a base under that. This one was pretty tall, so I decided to. All I did was cut 2 1x2s, the width of my base, or excuse me, 2 inches wider than what the bottom of my base was, so they were 5 inches, left an inch overhang on each side. And then right here I was pointing out my mistake on the tree. It's pretty frustrating after I glued all those up. I should have caught it before that, but hey, everybody does it. And they say the only difference between an amateur and a pro woodworker is knowing how to fix their mistakes. So, not saying I'm a pro by any sense of the imagination, but just if you don't take anything else out of it, just understand that if you mess up, there's probably a way of fixing it. Just take a step back, take a breath, look at it, and work out something to fix it. Here I just used an offcut. Again, snuck up on the angle. This one come from the same board, so the grain pattern matched up fine. Once I done the glue up in the sanding on this, you're never going to see that line, and you're never going to know that it was there unless you watch this video. Alright, so here I was gluing up those 1x's that I used for the material. Again, I cut 45 degree angles on them. I just like the way it looks. You could do a round over, or you could do a less sharp angle. It's just up to you. If you want to follow along, it's a 45. I just glued them down and I put them in clamps. So I just used a flat white paint on this. So this was going to be another piece of interior decoration. You could finish it and do exterior decoration if you like. However, I'm just going to make 2 different takes on fall pumpkins. So people like these because they don't rot, obviously, at least not as fast as a vegetable would. So I'm just going to use this piece of rough Spanish cedar. It's what I have. You can use pine, you can use construction grade lumber. It just really doesn't matter. Use what you got, use what you want, and then just choose if you want to finish it or not. So for me, I like the color of this for pumpkins as is. So with this board, I probably will not finish it. So it's up to you though. So I had to mill it down. You see it's pretty rough wood. I just used my jointer. It's a 6-inch jointer, so it was wide enough to do this board. One of these days I'm going to invest in a tabletop planer so I don't have to buy either thin material or S3S. So once I got the 2 sides squared, I just squared one side on the planer as well. Excuse me, on the jointer as well. And it took several passes. I'm only showing one, but it was probably around 10 passes. This board had a pretty good bow in it. Probably would have been faster to use the table saw trick that I showed you earlier. So I had one side square on the jointer. I just put that side against the fence and squared the other side. I did use a tape measure to measure both sides, so I limited my waste. This board wound up being just over 6 inches. It was like 6 1/8 or something like that. It's not, it just doesn't matter for what we were doing here as long as they're all even. That's all that matters. Here I was just measuring them out. For this particular build, the first 2 are 8 inches. Alright, so I just stacked them, and you're going to stack your smallest one, next largest, all the way up to the largest, and then back down. And that piece on top, I apologize, I don't have any footage of cutting that. It's literally just a stick I found in the yard, cut it down on the miter saw to make a little top for the pumpkin. Doing the glue up, I find it easier to dry stack them and then stack them with the glue, just so I don't get them mixed up when I'm actually doing the glue up. And there it is. You can see it looks like a pumpkin. Just do a flat orange on this one. You wouldn't have to on this more redwood if you didn't want to. I just thought it looked pretty cool, so I did. I did also do one without. So there's the finished product. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you for watching. Hopefully you make some money. And please like and subscribe.